The Senate just showed everyone what war powers look like when Congress wants authority, but not necessarily responsibility. On paper, this was a vote about Iran. More specifically, it was about whether President Trump can keep using military force against Iran without clear authorization from Congress. They call the campaign Operation Epic Fury, but the deeper story is bigger than Iran. It is about a question Congress keeps avoiding: who actually decides when America is at war? Because the Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, the President commands the military, but Congress is supposed to decide whether the country enters a war in the first place. That is the theory. The practice is much messier. For decades, presidents from both parties have used military force without formal declarations of war. They call it limited action, self-defense, counterterrorism, humanitarian intervention, emergency authority, protection of American interests. Different labels, same pattern. The president acts first, and Congress argues later. That is what happened here. The Senate first passed a wars power measure aimed at limiting further military action against Iran without congressional approval. 4 Republicans joined Democrats, which made it look like Congress was finally drawing a line. But then Trump went to Capitol Hill. He confronted Republican senators over the vote, including Senator Bill Cassidy, who had supported the measure. Cassidy later received a White House briefing and voted against a separate but nearly identical resolution. Rand Paul, who has repeatedly criticized unauthorized wars, switched to voting present, saying he wanted to give the president more room to negotiate peace. And just before midnight, the second resolution failed. So in the span of roughly a day, the Senate went from sending a warning to pulling it back. That is the part that matters, because war power votes are often treated like symbolism, a message, a rebuke, a way for Congress to say, we should have a say here. But if the message collapses after one meeting with the president, then the problem is not just Trump. The problem is that Congress keeps treating its own war authority like an optional ceremony. Because this was a concurrent resolution, it doesn't go to the president's desk for a signature. The White House calls it a toothless political gesture. Democrats call it legally binding under the War Powers Act. It is a built-in legal loophole that lets lawmakers look tough on camera without risking a real constitutional crisis. And while that fight was happening, the administration was asking Congress for more money, not a small amount. $87.6 billion in new funding, most of it tied to the Iran war, including money for military operations, weapons, readiness, and classified programs. That is the contradiction. Congress says it wants a say over the war, then Congress is asked to pay for the war. And if Congress funds it anyway, the vote becomes much less meaningful, because war is not only authorized with speeches, it is authorized with money. Every appropriation, every weapons replenishment package, every emergency funding bill, every classified account. That is how Congress can oppose a war in theory while sustaining it in practice. Supporters of Trump's position argue that the president needs flexibility. Iran is dangerous, the region is unstable, negotiations require leverage, and if Congress micromanages every use of force, the United States looks weak and slow. The argument has always existed, and it is not completely fake. Presidents do need the ability to respond to urgent threats, but there is a difference between responding to an emergency and maintaining an ongoing war while Congress stands off to the side pretending it has no role. That is where the line starts to disappear. If the president can start the war, define the emergency, keep the troops engaged, ask for more money, and pressure Congress not to interfere, then Congress is not really deciding, it is reacting. And that is how constitutional power dies in real time. Not always through one dramatic coup. Sometimes it dies because lawmakers would rather complain about executive overreach than take a vote that might cost them politically. That is the real story behind the Iran war powers fight. It is not just Trump versus the Senate, it is Congress versus its own cowardice. Because once presidents learn they can act first, demand money later, and dare Congress to stop them, the pattern does not stay with one president. It becomes the new baseline, and the next war starts from there.